So my friends, in this video we're taking a look at the Samsung S95B, which will always be on the left, and the LG C2, which will always be on the right. These are two of the most popular TVs and the most talked about TVs in 2022, so let's put them head to head and see which one comes out best. Okay, so the look of these TVs is actually quite similar. They've both got the central stand. The LG's is slightly wider and it is made of metal. However, the Samsung's looks almost identical, but it is made of plastic and it's a little bit squarer and it definitely sits flatter, so you can get a soundbar underneath it, whereas with the LG you would still struggle. The bezels around the edge of these are fairly minimal, but the LG definitely wins it on design because the bezels are about 2 or 3 millimeters smaller. But other than that, these TVs do look very similar. One area where the Samsung S95B definitely wins is reflections. It's just not as glossy and not as black as the LG. And when you turn both TVs off, well, they're just completely different colours. Now this may be to do with the anti-reflective coating that Samsung are using, but it's a little bit weird. But the good news is it doesn't affect the blacks. The software on both of these TVs actually looks quite similar, but there's too much on both in my opinion. But on the Samsung, it is ridiculous. Plus it's a little bit laggy and just not as smooth as the LG. After a while of it being warm, it seems to be okay. But also look at how much stuff is on the Samsung. If we scroll down, you'll see about 5 or 6 rows on the LG. But the Samsung just goes on and on and on. Now, I don't think this can do anything to improve your experience. And as I said in the full review, I would rather just see the main connected sources, which by the way are really hard to find, and then just the apps. I don't want any of the other rubbish. What's your thoughts on this? With the LG, to connect to all of your different sources, you literally need to press the sources button, and then they appear at the bottom of the screen. With the Samsung, however, if you're using the newer remote control, there's not a sources button on there. So you have to press the home screen, then go down to menu, then go across to connected devices, then go down to all of the different connected devices. Now, it takes a few seconds more, but it is just a bit more of a pain, and it would be great to have had that access via the remote. When it came to picture quality, I think I preferred the Samsung. I think it handled black detail better and we got more detail in the picture. Both of these TVs were reset, both in filmmaker mode, and this is what I feel is the best mode out of the box with the latest versions of the software available. I think that the blacks on the Samsung just seem better in most scenes. Don't get me wrong, it's not every scene, but it's most scenes. And in some scenes, the brightness definitely seems visibly much different. Now, I've purposely done this with a non-calibrated set. Both of these sets are non-calibrated because I don't think most people will get their TVs calibrated, so you want to see what they're like out of the box. But whereas I found that on the previous scene with the black detail, it was better on the Samsung, on this scene going through the woods, yes, the Samsung's brighter in most areas, but it just doesn't seem that it handles the contrast so well, and so therefore my preference is the LG. On this scene, for instance, again, the Samsung is definitely brighter, but the extra contrast that seems to be within the LG, I prefer, which doesn't appear in most scenes. So I do think that the LG does have a knack sometimes of just introducing too much blue, and that is apparent in quite a lot of the footage that I've seen. And even when I went through all of the different modes, it did seem that the Samsung was much more natural. Don't get me wrong, the LG wasn't bad by any stretch of the imagination, the Samsung was just a bit better. Now obviously with both of these TVs you've got the options for enhancing the contrast, taking the colours back a little bit and tweaking them. So I've not done that in this video because I wanted you to see them as they are. But all of those things can be changed, and I think that you'll probably get an even closer image, and you'll just then see the extra brightness on the Samsung. And as you can see from this, I think the Samsung looks better. It looks less blue and much more natural. However, on this scene, if I zoom in 200%, you're getting far more detail on that Samsung. There's far more stars when we froze frame at the exact same moment in time. And this is it at 400%, and you can really see the difference. It's definitely brighter, there's much more detail, there's much more stars, and it's definitely a bit sharper. Now don't get me wrong, both of these TVs deliver what I think is a fantastic picture, and if any of you have seen these in the flesh, then I'm sure that you'll agree. But in the majority of scenes that we tested, the Samsung definitely was noticeably brighter. and so therefore gave the more natural and I think the more pleasant image. Now, it certainly wasn't every scene. There were plenty where these two delivered an almost identical image. So the extra brightness is not visible in every single scene. So that's something which you do have to bear in mind. And so I guess that's a good thing, but also one of these TVs is a lot more expensive than the other. And should that be a reason for you to purchase? Well, looking at this scene for instance, is there one which is superior to the other? When it came to darker scenes, there were some stranger results. This from Stranger Things, no pun intended. As you can see, the road is a completely different colour on the LG. It's far brighter. However, the peak highlights, if you look at the torches or the lights on the bikes and the guy's t-shirt and hat, there is a big difference in the Samsung. So although it's a brighter TV, it doesn't necessarily mean to say that all of the scenes all of the time will be brightness. It's just got the capability in the peak brightness to deliver a better, brighter image. That also then follows through onto this type of image. Because if you look at the colours and if you look at the blacks, they're almost identical. There's no perceivable difference. However, in the brightest parts, the whites and the actual highlights, there is a noticeable difference on the Samsung. And it therefore, in my opinion, does deliver a better image. But is the difference enough? Now, one thing that I do have to say is that although the Samsung was clearly brighter, I don't necessarily think that I preferred that in all of the different scenes. And sometimes comparing it to the LG on the right, it almost looked a little bit washed out, and the LG with the being a bit darker looked like it was a little bit better. Some scenes were clearly better, like here for instance on the Lion, but it certainly wasn't all the time. The one thing that I'm really gutted about is the fact that I didn't get this TV at the time where it had 1500 nits of brightness, because then the differences I think would have been bigger. Now, I know that they weren't as accurate in terms of colours at that point, and the accuracy and colours have got a lot better with the software updates, so who knows what will happen in the future. SDR footage from both of these TVs is incredible. The upscaling capabilities, I think, are fantastic. Now again, without a doubt, there is definitely more brightness to the Samsung, and in pretty much every SDR scene we saw, it came across and was pretty obvious. There were the odd scenes where, like this, where there's not that much difference at all, but the majority, probably 8 out of 10, there was a noticeable difference. So what you've got to decide as a buyer is that extra brightness, as it is at the moment, worth the extra money? So the one thing that we haven't mentioned so far is the elephant in the room about the software updates to the Samsung. Because when it was running 1211 software, there were peak brightness reached in HDR mode of around 1500 nits. Now the most that I got when I measured it last week, and I did a brightness test video, was around 1200 nits. So are they going to keep it at that, or are they going to give us that extra brightness back? Because if they do, well then this could be a completely different beast altogether. And I guess it's a case of wait and see, because it would be great if it did, but if it doesn't, as you can see from the majority of what you've been seeing in this video, it's probably not worth the extra money. Now when it came to gaming, it's important to set the HDR screen correctly, and following Vincent's advice from HDTV Test, if you set it to just after the sun goes on the LG, then that's absolutely fine, but on the Samsung it makes it far too bright, and I'll give you a demo now. The black level you can still do down to the bottom, and that gives you the best blacks, and in this scene it looks great. Both TVs look great, and you can definitely see the extra brightness on the Samsung. And because this is like a video clip, then it's processing it differently, and so therefore there isn't a problem with this. But what you'll notice in a second, as soon as I go into a game with this HDR setting on the Samsung, the highlights are just completely blown out and the game is unplayable. And this is what I mean. If you go into Dirt 5 now, you can see the differences are just absolutely incredible. You lose so much detail in the highlights on the Samsung with that HDR setting so high. And when the game actually starts, it does just become really unwatchable. And I found this when I was setting and doing the review on the Samsung S95B, the full review, when I was playing pretty much any game which had HDIG. Now, if you go in and set it correctly, which is 15 stops on the Samsung, then then you get the benefits of both worlds. You get the extra brightness, but you don't get those highlights blown out. And as you can see now here, it's dialed it right back, but it looks brilliant, and it's far superior than the LG in terms of brightness. And so for gamers out there, for me, there's probably only one choice. So if you're serious into gaming, just look at the stars, for instance, on the Samsung. You can pick out stars in the sky, but they're hard to see on the LG. So definitely Samsung wins on this. So my friends, in summary, which TV is the best and which one should you choose? Well, I think it's dependent on a few different factors. So without a doubt, the LG is far better in terms of its software and the fact that you can access things like the connected devices so easily. But without a doubt, the Samsung delivers the better picture right across the board. But at the moment, guys, we're living in a time of austerity, and the amount that you want to spend out really has to be thought about, and every penny is important. And so therefore, it's down to, for me, whether you think the extra is worth it. Now, don't get me wrong, with future software updates, the Samsung potentially could get even better. It could go back even closer to what it was when it first came out, and remarkably, it's not like that now, which is so frustrating to many people. But if we got even extra brightness back, then I think it would be hands down the clear winner. But at the moment, with what we've seen, the difference in the picture, I'm not sure whether it's worth it. And so therefore, for me personally, if I had to choose one, I think I would keep some cash in my back pocket and buy the C2. But the S95B is the better TV, pretty much across the board. Guys, that's my thoughts. I'm not professing to say that you should think exactly the same, but I think that it's something to bear in mind.